This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Teider and I'm super excited about my guest today. My guest is Laila Soudi, and Laila is originally from Jordan. She grew up in Jordan, which is a home to many refugees, as we're going to learn now. Laila's mom is Palestinian and her father is Syrian. Laila is a founder and director of Stanford Med MENA Health Program, which is focused on building health research across Middle East and North Africa. She's also founder of Sana Relief, which is delivering basic mental health care to refugees. She's also founder of Stanford Refugee Research Project, with the goal to identify how universities could engage in the refugee crisis through education and healthcare. And I'm sure Laila will tell us more about this. And on top of everything else, she keeps writing for Washington Post, Huffington Post, Guardian, and other big outlets about the role of mental health in the refugee crisis. Laila, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I am super excited about our conversation, and I'm so excited you're here because I heard you on a panel of a women's conference, Amplifying Her Voice conference, and there was a panel about the refugee crisis. I think it was about COVID crisis in refugee camps. Mm-hmm. And I heard you speak, and I heard all the other ladies speak, and I was just astounded. I was so deeply touched by the work you guys do and the passion with which you do it, helping other people and dealing with the topic that in many, many parts of the world is forgotten. Like, United States is not thinking a lot about what's going on over there. And it's a real humanitarian crisis. So I was very excited when you said yes. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you. I was equally excited.
Laila, will you tell my listeners a little more about your work and how you got to do all these amazing things?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. Maybe we could start with sort of how I got here, and then speak about what we're doing now. Mm-hmm. So as you mentioned, I grew up in the Middle East, in Jordan specifically, and I live in Amman. I live now in Amman. I lived then in Amman too. And Amman is about 30 to 40 minutes close to a refugee camp, right? There's on the order of 20 plus refugee camps all throughout Jordan. And so growing up, with having a Palestinian mom and a Syrian father, they sort of instilled in me at a very young age the privilege that I have, and the responsibility to use that privilege to do good in this world. And so when I was pretty young, I think I was around 10 or 11 when I started going to refugee camps initially. And it was really just to see, what conditions were like, what I could do. And granted, there's not a lot of technical skills that I could really leverage at 10, right? Like I couldn't really perform surgery. I couldn't really perform therapy. I couldn't really figure out what I wanted to do, or what I could do rather. All I knew is that I wanted to sort of witness firsthand, right? So that I could start ultimately building towards, those technical skills that would at some point contribute to that community. And so I used to go with my uncle, who's an orthopedic surgeon, and he would perform surgery and sort of pro bono, medical consultations. And I would just listen to people's stories, right? Make sure that they were standing in line, waiting to see my uncle, and I would just hear their stories. And, I was exposed then and there to girls not much older than I was at the time. So around 13 or 14, and just exposed to debilitating circumstances like rape and, intergenerational trauma, right? And I think it struck me then, I don't know that I fully could articulate it at 11, but it struck me then how neglected mental health was in refugee crises, and how if we don't address mental health, then everything else is futile, right? We're missing a massive sort of gap. And long story short, I ended up just moving with my family to the States when I was around 13 or so. And I was really trying to be intentional about building up my skills so I could someday go back and help the community. So I studied psychology, neuroscience, and got a master's in global health. And then I was able to sort of live in Germany for a little bit after I graduated from grad school. And this was at the height of the refugee crisis, right?
2016, was it?
Yeah, 2015, 2016. And so I worked there, and then I think just, growing up partially also in the Bay Area, I sort of grew up with, there was such like a mismatch in terms of resources, right? It was like I was navigating two worlds. Like on the one hand, there's Silicon Valley and all these major companies, right? Like Google and Facebook and literally almost every company that you could imagine that's massive, right? Mm-hmm. And like companies' operating costs that are more than like entire countries' operating costs in the Middle East, right?
But also
at the same time, there was sort of
private wealth that you see here in the United
absolutely.
States that's sometimes mind-boggling. Yep.
Absolutely. And then, on the other hand, there was sort of this other world where, people lived on like $1 a day. And it wasn't so much lack of anything, lack of ability or education, or it was just lack of opportunity. And for a while, I really struggled to figure out how to balance both of those worlds. And at some point after Germany, I wanted to go back to the Bay Area and try to figure out a way to leverage some of the resources back to communities that really need it at home. And so I got a job at Stanford. It was what I deemed to be a logical next step, And I started working in something that was really unrelated to like global mental health or the refugee crisis or the Middle East. As far as I was seeing, there was nothing sort of being done on a big scale, right? Aside from like maybe somebody's like pro bono volunteer hours or something, like a faculty member, but no organized effort. And so I got a job that had nothing to do with that. It was like technical neuroimaging analysis. And then I just got to know people along the way and got these incredible opportunities to, eventually become like a global mental health researcher. And I got to travel to Greece and Germany and Syria and Lebanon and all of these other places and really figure out firsthand from refugees what they needed. And then around 4 years ago, I got this really sort of awesome opportunity where, I reached out to the president of Stanford just via email. And I figure like I was pretty young. I was one staff member of, like thousands, that he's super busy. And, but at the same time, I was like, well, what do I have to lose by emailing him? Right. Like this was when I was in in Greece, and I was witnessing firsthand, like children crossing the Mediterranean with dinghies and, some sort of dying across the way and having a member of the family come back and report the story and just really terrible circumstances. And so I felt like I needed to tell somebody. And so then I just wrote the president of Stanford an email and I said, hey, it's our ethical responsibility to do something. And so 6 months later, I was provided funding to really think about the role that Stanford could play in the refugee crisis. And so I launched that project and I worked on it for around 3 years. And then it's an ongoing successful project. But about a year ago, I decided that I wanted to really think more sustainably. And I wanted to really think about, at some point when refugees live in, a different country for, say 12 years, 13, 14 years, you can't continue to just provide services for refugees, right? You can no longer distinguish between ethnicities. You can't just say, I'm going to provide services for Syrian refugees, but I'm going to ignore the vulnerable Jordanians, for example, or I'm going to provide only for Syrian refugees, but I'm going to ignore the Iraqi ones or the Yemeni ones, right? And so then I went back to him and I got this bridge funding to really think critically about the role of Stanford and to respond from like a health research implementation and capacity building lens. what Stanford could do in the Middle East. And that's the program that I have today.
Wow. Are you in contact with other universities? Is there a thought about it not only being Stanford, creating a network of universities
Absolutely.
to start thinking about this?
Absolutely. Sure. So when we were, specifically the refugee crisis, we mapped out what every single university in the States was doing to combat the refugee crisis, whether it was like literally down to like undergrad students having bake sales all the way up to like the president funding some sort of effort.
Okay.
And then we figured out a way to create like a coalition and work really across the board, right? I'm really against, like this is especially a problem in the humanitarian space where there's very little collaboration. And I try to be really intentional about not perpetuating that, right? I think we all have a lot to gain if we just communicate and work together better.
Wow, congratulations on this amazing work. Laila, you're currently in Jordan again.
I am.
For work, for your project?
It was sort of a combo of work. I came here a month pre-COVID and with the intention of really figuring out ways that we could support and, meeting all of these other stakeholders. And then COVID hit. And my family lives in Jordan. And so, so I'm here for the time being, but as vaccines continue to roll out, I imagine I'll be back and forth again.
What is the situation like with COVID in Jordan?
It's pretty hard. It's so Jordan is home to 10 million people. So it's a pretty small country. And I think around, less than 1 million people have had either dose, so one or both. So we still have a long way to go. But I mean, the government's really stepped up in terms of ensuring that refugees are also part of the vaccine rollout. So they're like refugees in refugee camps who have access to this vaccine as well, which I think is really important.
What is going on with COVID in refugee camps? Is there a big crisis with that?
It's not so much. I mean, yes, there is, and just depends on the context, right? But in this context here specifically, there are like documented cases of COVID from refugee camps. The issue is there's a lot of other issues, right? There's lack of like testing. So there's a lot of issues that sort of really mimic the extent of COVID prevalence. But what you see more than anything isn't necessarily the physical symptoms. It's what's happened to people as a direct result of COVID in terms of like the economic implications, right? So Jordan decided to go under essentially lockdown for months, maybe a little bit prematurely when we were registering a few cases. And I think it was meant to be like a preventative approach. But it just means that, folks couldn't really access employment for a long time. And so more than anything today, it's folks struggling with food insecurity or right? Not having any kind of home, like there's no physical infrastructure because they can't afford rent. They don't have a steady job. So it's all of those really like the implications from COVID more than necessarily the physical disease.
Yeah. Laila, before we jump into talking about Mama, here's a topic that I am embarrassed to admit that I just discovered a few days ago, which is the sleeping children in Sweden. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, so it's horrific. And I first read reports a few years ago, and I haven't necessarily been hearing about the specific ailment in a while. But it's very much they've documented a few cases in Europe. They haven't necessarily, and it could totally be the lack of research, you know. They haven't necessarily documented it in the Middle East, but it speaks to the atrocities that refugees get to experience. And there's more than one sort of level, right? I think that most people assume it's like, yeah, you see war and you see conflict and bombing and shelling and all of that stuff, like in Syria, for example. But there's a lot of difficulty also in the journey, right? And how do you get to Sweden or Germany or, you know? Yeah. And that it's like physically arduous. Like people are literally crossing by foot. And then there's also the period of acclimation when they get there, right? It's the often hostility and not being around family and not speaking the language and all of these other barriers. So it's sort of compounded adversity.
And leaving everything behind. I mean, I am in a way, I don't like saying it, but in a way a war refugee. I left Croatia in the middle of a blackout. And when the first air raid happened in Zagreb, and I left to Vienna, and what's traumatizing is leaving everything behind. You know, that's just leaving your whole life. Even if you later go back to this, that experiencing once this feeling of you just leave everything behind you, your friends, your family, your home, your things, your life, your country, your language. But so to explain to my listeners, sleeping children, as I'm reading, I read there are a few hundred cases, especially in Sweden, with refugee children who just don't wake up, who fall asleep and asleep. Some of them are asleep for years, and nobody can explain why, and why most of the cases happen in Sweden. And it's interesting that it's a specific refugees from a specific part of the world. So that's a totally unexplainable phenomena, and I can't imagine how hard it is for the parents to deal with that, and nobody knows what to do about it. But let's talk about brighter things now. Let's talk about Mama. And I was so touched to learn that Mama's name is Sana, which is one of your foundations. Is it called a foundation? What is it called? Programs.
Yeah,
you named
the program.
One. Yeah, you named one of your program after your mama, and I just love it. Tell me about her. Tell me about Mama Sana.
Thank you. Yeah, so Sana actually means light in Arabic, and the idea behind sort of naming a program after her was hoping that the ideas that I wanted to use her name and sort of spread lightness and kindness and do good wherever I could, right? So it was sort of a pledge that I was going to use her name to do good in this world. And let's see, my mom is a wonderful, incredibly grounded, incredibly kind, loving woman. She's originally Palestinian, and my mom sort of, was born in the UK, and then moved back to Palestine when she was around 2. And then when she was 7, war broke out. And so she's a refugee. She fled to Jordan. And I think home for her will always be Palestine. But she's just incredibly resilient and just a beautiful spirit. And the way that I think just her experience of being a refugee and the way that she has shown up with such kindness and presence has really definitely impacted, I think, me and my sisters and just our whole family.
Does she have brothers or sisters? Did they move with her?
Yeah, she has one brother who also lives a block away from her right now.
Oh, nice. Where is she right now?
They've stayed close. She's in Amman.
Oh, she is. So she left. So at one point she moved from Jordan to California, and then she moved back to Jordan?
She did, yeah. Oh, so wow. My mom grew up sort of between Palestine and Jordan. And then she got a scholarship to attend a university in California.
Oh, that's amazing.
So she ended up going there.
Oh, cool. What was she studying?
She's an immunologist.
Did she start studying that in California, or did she start university in Jordan?
No, she sort of got a scholarship through the public sector, and it was sort of on the condition that she come back and work at a military hospital.
Okay.
And so they gave her a full scholarship. She moved, and at that point, it's almost like they give you a few options, right? It's not like, here's an unlimited roster of universities. It was like, here's a school in New York and here's a school in California. Mm-hmm. And so she just jumped at the opportunity and, did well academically, got the scholarship, and moved back after 4 years. And my dad, a year after having sort of moved back to Jordan, mm-hmm. and they've been married ever since.
And where do you come in this picture? What was this before you? Did she go to school before you or after?
She did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no. So she went the traditional, 18 to 22 years old, and then she moved back. And then, I have two older sisters. Mm-hmm. And I was personally also born in Jordan. And then around 2004, my family decided to move to California again. Mm-hmm. And actually, we just decided pretty much to move to the States. And it was at the time when both of my sisters were sort of ready to start college. And my mom was like, well, I've been to California. And let's just, and she went to school in Oakland, California, and mm-hmm. Berkeley. Mm-hmm. And so she was like, let's just move to San Francisco. And so she literally just took the whole family.
Wow.
And we all lived in California for 6 years. I lived a lot longer than 6 years, but they moved back after 6 years and they've been here ever since.
So mom is the motor behind the family moving back and forth.
Oh, totally. Mom is like full force. This is good for the family. We need to experience other cultures. This is where our daughters can have a job security and mm-hmm. and she always thinks ahead, right? How do I make conditions better for my future generations, and how do I provide opportunities? And so she just decided that we needed to sort of become U.S. citizens, and that was in the best interest of our family. And so she and my dad is resistant to change. He just doesn't love it. Uh-huh. But he just trusts her. So she really just moves us. She's the force, and we just listen.
I love it. What does he do?
He's a computer engineer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And was he able to find work when she moves him from country to country?
Yeah. So my dad was in the my dad was in the intelligence department in mm-hmm. Jordan as a computer engineer. Mm-hmm. He's a pretty wonderful man as well, mm-hmm. very accomplished. Mm-hmm. He sort of set up computers across the security departments across Jordan. Mm-hmm. So he's a wonderful man, super accomplished. And then when we moved, he just he took it upon himself to find just consultancy based jobs. He didn't oppose. Mm-hmm. So they made it work.
I love it. So everybody's back. Are your sisters back as well in Jordan?
My sisters also live in Jordan.
Oh, great. Mm-hmm. So you're all back.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's talk about the lessons. I'm so curious what mm-hmm. you've learned from this amazing mom.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is resilience, right? My mom is incredibly resilient. She lost her dad when she was only 9. And he sort of died very suddenly. He was an ENT doctor, and he was sort of marching in this parade, right? I think it was some sort of national parade. Mm-hmm. And he was dressed in uniform, he's a practicing military physician, mm-hmm. and he just suddenly had a stroke and he passed away on site. And she was very young. Mm. And my grandma was also in her 20s when, in her late 20s, and suddenly a mom of 2, mm-hmm. and not having graduated from even high school. And, my grandma's also an incredible story of somebody who's overcome adversity. And she eventually sort of, went up the ranks to get a PhD in clinical psychology.
Did she
from
really?
Not having graduated from high school.
Oh, mm-hmm. Wow. With 2
at
children.
55.
being being the what is it called, the sole breadwinner for 2 children. That's amazing.
Yeah. She got her PhD at 55, I think, or 50 or something.
Wow.
So she did it much later. Yeah. So I think she instilled that in my mom, who then instilled it in us. But the idea of resilience, right? Like, I think because my grandma had lost her husband, she had to work a lot to provide for the 2 kids. So she became a journalist talking about women's issues when nobody else was. And so that meant that my mom had to take care of her younger brother and, grew up, I think, a lot faster than she would have otherwise. And it made her recognize that, maybe unless she did well, like super well academically, she wasn't going to afford college, right? So she had to take those extra steps to guarantee a scholarship to do really well. So I think she taught me that resilient spirit. In the midst of adversity, there's always a way to make it work, right? If you're just focused on the vision, you keep working at it.
Wow, you ladies are amazing.
Thank you.
But
I appreciate it.
I can guess that you also learn with such background of these strong women who dare to try so much. I guess there's a lot of courage to go out there and do it as well. Not only resilience, but with a grandmother who did her PhD in her late 50s after all of that, it's like, yeah, I can do it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, and I think one thing that's really surprised me, and maybe it's like the foreigner in me, I'm not totally sure what it is, but I think people are a little bit shy, like of sort of stepping out and, have this assumption of like, why would the president of this massive institution want to talk to me? Like, what do I have to offer? Or why? And no matter what it is, like if it's a school and you're a teacher, you avoid sort of talking to the principal or the director of the school. And if you're like, I think that we're just so embedded in staying kind of within our ranks.
Yes.
And I never really understood that. I just figure, like, just reach out. They're people at the end of the day, they're family members. This is just their title. And they might ignore you, and that's perfectly okay, but you're not going to get anywhere if you don't just ask,
Thank you so much for saying this. I need this so much at this stage of my life where I'm about to reach out to people about turning Thank You Mama into a book and other things that I would like to do. And I it's interesting. My mom used to teach me that. And when you told me about how you just wrote this letter to the head of Stanford University, that's what my mom would push me to do. She would always say, what do you have to lose? You can only get a no as an answer, but you tried, And I lost her 4 years ago, and I miss that. And this is a part of the reason why I started this podcast, because at one point I started worrying I was going to forget everything she taught me, and I started writing it all down. So in a way, this is a beautiful circle.
That is such a beautiful story.
Yeah, this is a beautiful circle where I'm right now experiencing exactly that. Like I lost that courage that she used to give me, and now you're giving it to me through your mom. How beautiful is that? Thank you.
I appreciate it. But honestly, let me say this now super loud and clear. When this becomes a book, I'm getting a copy.
Thank you. Yes. It's going to be a beautiful book.
I think you're sharing some incredibly powerful messages, and they need to be shared to the world. Yes. And I'm happy to support in whatever way possible.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's such a beautiful this project makes my heart dance. It's one of these things where it just it just makes me so happy, and I'm very excited to offer it to the world, because I really think it spreads some very important and loving messages and inspiration.
Absolutely.
But anyway, let's go back to Mama Sana. Let's learn more about her. Do you have any other things you would like to share that she taught you?
Any other things? Yeah, Mom is so. What I love about my mom also is sort of related to the themes that we're bringing up, is she's not afraid of trying new things. She's not afraid of sort of counterculture. Like, I think my mom, and it might be the fact that, she went to Berkeley, and so she was exposed to that sort of liberal nature at a young age. And I don't exactly know where she gets it from, but she is never really like in the, the Middle East tends to be a fairly conservative place, and there are clearly pockets where that's not the case at all. And I think it's so beautiful that she spreads sort of unconditional love and like new ideas and new ventures that maybe aren't tried and tested in the Middle East, and she's not afraid to do so. Like I think she's the first and only light therapist in Jordan, and she brought this idea of light therapy, which, like is fairly new. It's fairly unconventional. It's known. There's like an evidence base behind it that if you expose yourself to light, kind of like if you expose yourself to the sun, then it has really impacts on your mental health, right? Like, it's used to fight like, ADD or
Depression.
Or seasonal affective disorder or depression or anxiety or.
I have a daylight lamp here next to me.
No way.
I do. When you live in,
she would love that.
She would love. When you live in Seattle, you need this. During the winter, that's the first. I sit down on my computer and I click it on, and I do my 30 minutes of daylight. I love it.
Absolutely. And when she first sort of brought this idea here, I think a lot of people were like, "What? Like, you have starving people here, and what is this nonsense?" And, like people don't necessarily respond in the best way when presented with new ideas that maybe scare them. And my mom just did not care. She was like, "Well, this is what I'm going to do, and it's going to help people. And, there's going to be haters, and that's okay. I will remain unfazed." And now she operates a full clinic, and she has clients who love her and come back to her sort of on a regular basis.
Fantastic.
So the idea of, trying new things and not being scared of the outcome and, sort of not giving into what culture or society is used to or always says yes to because it's the traditional way is something that she instilled in me as well.
Do we have anything else you'd like to share?
Anything else? No, I mean, I think that pretty much encapsulates, I think, her essence. I've learned a lot, and I'm incredibly privileged and super, super lucky to just witness somebody who spreads unconditional love and resilience and compassion and strength. And, I hope that, like, I'm a fourth the mom that she is one day,
I know. That's how I feel. But as you were speaking, I just realized her name is Sana, which you said means light, and she works as a light therapist. I
know, that's funny,
that's
isn't
cute.
it?
Yeah, Nomen is Nomen.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you the trick question.
I don't know that she planned it, but it just happened.
I wanted to ask you the trick question. Is there something important that she was not able to teach you, something that you had to learn yourself?
I don't know. I don't know that I would. I don't think that I have a really clear answer for that. I don't think it was anything that she failed to teach me in any capacity or just didn't. I think that what I learned is I'd learned a lot from just like her partnership with my dad. And I learned, and it could be any form of that, right? And whatever parents and whatever guardian role you have in your life, but it's just a beautiful presence when you're around two people who really complement each other. And my mom is, a dreamer in a lot of ways, right? Like she goes after things and she doesn't really care about the consequences necessarily because she's brazen and bold. And, and my dad is really calculated, right? He's an engineer by nature. And so, and I think witnessing their compatibility and then learning as much as I can from both of them has really been sort of a powerful force in my life.
It's beautiful that it turned out this way. I come from a mom who was a dreamer and creative, and a father who is also an engineer and very down to earth, and that did not work well. Instead of complementing each other, they were clashing each other. So
totally. And I don't know what drives it to be one outcome or the other.
Yeah.
I don't have the answer to that, right? Yeah, I have no idea.
That's a topic for a different podcast. Laila, thank you so much for being here. I want to just quickly recap. I wrote down resilience and having the courage and being the dreamer and just doing things. And then I wrote down not being afraid of trying new things and also not giving into society norms or just giving into what we consider is normal. And I also wrote down this partnership that we talked about, how beautifully people who are different can complement each other. We don't know how to do that and why it happens, but is there anything else that I missed? Oh,
no, I mean, I think...
And reach out, this thing that we talked about, I wrote that as a separate lesson. Just reach out, just do the thing, just dare.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
There's nothing to lose. Just try it.
Absolutely. And, I think, in thinking through, just even in having this conversation with you, I realized that might have come from the fact that she, went through so much adversity at a young age that I think at some point in her is instilled this concept of how short life is, right?
Yes.
And I think that's why we have to reach out, is we never... Yes. I think we all kind of have a tendency to take things for granted, like to stay at jobs that we're miserable in just because it gives us something. It gives us a paycheck at the end of 2 weeks or whatever. But I think it's really powerful once we stop looking at life that way and stop pretending like it's a guarantee and start living of like, this might be the end, right? Like, how do I want to live my life if I have 24 hours to go?
Yes.
And you start making super different decisions, right? And I think that's really powerful.
Mm-hmm. That's so important. And that's the base, not only for doing things and daring to do things, but also enjoying life. And I think about that a lot. And this is something I learned from my mom, to just love life and enjoy life, because as you say, it's short. You never know what might happen. And just love it for it is right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Laila, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was an honor.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyoumama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider. That's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.